biggest thing to know about passing time to a certain extent within the fort, at least, is they didn't have a lot of free time. They were given very, very little holiday time. In fact, one of the things when I had to do research at one point into weddings in the fort, and what I've discovered is that through a lot of the fur trade, the only time that they would get people would be allowed time off for a wedding was at Christmas time, because they're giving them time off, a little bit of time off at Christmas anyway. So every wedding in the fort would happen all at the same time,
On Christmas.
basically on Christmas, and then they would have this massive like week-long party that would just never stop of them celebrating all of the weddings, and it sounds crazy. Like they would have musicians fiddling and stuff, and as they'd get tired, another person would come in to their place, and they just keep the music and the party going for like a week, and it's like, okay, done, everybody back to work. You're not gonna have much free time, because I mean, back then,
So much to do.
there's so much to do. Your survival depends on those things getting done, which is huge. And so if you're not getting things done, it's not only are you not getting paid, but it's like people are depending on their survival for the things that you're doing. And so it's pretty important that you're working. They don't have modern labor codes, so they don't necessarily have days off in the way that we have days off and things like that. That said, I mean, there's always ways that people find leisure time. Certainly music and fiddling and Métis fiddling comes out of the fur trade and that sort of culture. So people having social dances, having music. And then there would be, there would be card games people would play. There would be those little kind of things, but they didn't have the kind of leisure time that we have, because they would be busy a lot. And even the women that were in the fort, it was, again, the company is not giving you a free ride. Like you're working. You're not maybe doing the same work as the men, but you're doing a lot of work as well. And actually the women during the summer, because the men would get onto the boats to take furs to York factory and then come back. And it's worth noting, like, the trip there is 3 or 4 weeks to get out there, because you're following this current of the river, but to come back is 3 or 4 months. And summer is not that long in Alberta, and so you basically, like, as soon as the river is free of ice, you get the boat and you go, and then you're hoping you get back before it freezes. And during all of that time, the women basically ran the fort. And so there's always these ideas. It's like, the men got to do all the important stuff, but it's like, actually, like, the women, if the women weren't doing things, like, the men would have come back and all died, because nothing would have been done at the fort in the meantime. So the women were equally as important to the kind of the running of the fort as the men, even though they had different kinds of roles in that time.
So like, what were all the buildings? I know there's like meat, there's the shops.
So the first building that would ever be built in any Hudson Bay fort would be the trading post, because that's the most important place. That's why everything is there. So you've got that shop, which would often have a couple of different entrances, and if you go to the recreation fort, you can actually see that there's one that you come in on sort of the side, and that the gates of the fort can actually be closed, so that you're forced to go into that. And that's for the people that they're not sure if they entirely trust them yet or not. So maybe we don't want to let you into, like, our homes and things like that. So you send them in that way, and they would actually trade through kind of like metal bars, kind of like a jailer sort of thing. And so there's that sort of entrance, and it brings you directly into the grading room where they would grade the furs, and you'd look through and you could kind of see the shop. But the shop would have all your European goods, the things that they were using to trade. Absolutely, like beads, metal pots were a huge kind of thing, or any kind of sort of metal kind of implement. You wouldn't get a fully formed knife, but you'd get knife blades or axe heads, because they knew how to build their own things. They'd been building them for thousands of years. But those metal parts were kind of a huge thing to be able to trade. there were some guns available. They weren't super popular because most Aboriginal groups they would share items. So it's like you buy one gun and you're good. Your whole family, your whole tribe is set because you've got one, and that can already hunt more effectively than a number of things could before. So they weren't hugely popular, but they would do some trading for things like that.
There's the meat shop.
But yeah, so beyond that shop, then in Fort Edmonton you have the meat shop because it's a meat fort, as they say. Not all forts would necessarily have that. You've got throughout Fort Edmonton you have one of the other kind of main building stretches was called Bachelor's Hall, which when it was first built, the upstairs, which when they rebuilt Fort Edmonton, they didn't have this information, but there was an upstairs to it that is sort of missing. And the upstairs is originally where the chief factor actually lived before John Rowan built his big house in there. So he would have lived up there, and your bachelors, but not like just single guys, but it was actually your sort of more educated, your clerks, people who could read and write and had jobs in that sort of way would sort of live in those areas. You had the married men's quarters as a big part of what you've got for sort of shared accommodations. And then you've also got, you're going to have a whole bunch of tradesmen's areas in the shop. So you've got a blacksmith shop, which is crucial. They're constantly having to build York boats. So you've also got a York boat builder and a few people probably working on those. Because York boats, they're great. They can carry lots of furs. They're, in contrast, they take less people to manage a York boat than it took to manage a Voyageur canoe. But the trip up with all the portage and back, trip up and back, you probably get maybe 2 trips of a York boat and then it's done. And so they're constantly having to build those boats and pump them out pretty quickly. So you need nails to be built for those things. Nails, I mean, anything metal is super valuable, which is part of why when they talk about the old forts, we don't know a whole lot about them, because what they would do is when they were leaving a fort, they would burn it down so that they could then come back and scavenge and grab all the nails. And because pulling all the nails out of the wood would be terrible, but you burn the old fort down because you're leaving it, grab all the nails to build your next one, and keep all the metal around. Reuse, recycle kind of mentality. So you've got those kind of shops. Barrel making was another huge skill for being able to ship things and such. And so barrel making would be one of the better paid jobs actually for being a cooper, because it takes years of training to be actually able to put a barrel together and hand do all of that, which is kind of an amazing sort of thing. You generally would have an ice house, which is kind of like your deep freeze essentially. It's got a big pit that during the winter they would carve huge blocks of ice and they would take them into the ice house, put straw and sawdust and things on top of them to kind of insulate it. And it would take well into like mid-June before all that ice would sort of melt away, and so you could keep meat and things in there basically as your fridge, because there was no fridges obviously back then. So your ice house is a big thing. At Fort Edmonton we did have some stables for some horses. John Rowan himself actually kept a few horses, and he actually raced horses as a hobby. Like most people don't have free time, but John Rowan races horses. But it was also a status symbol amongst the Aboriginal people, and so if he wants to look like he's an important person, it's important for him to have some of those status symbols himself too, so they know that he's an important person and he's somebody they want to trade with. Trying to think of around if there's anything much